Welcome to this webinar on meals in the early years. My name is Dr. Noel Purdy. I'm Director of Research and Scholarship here at Stranmillis University College in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I'm also Director of the Centre for Research in Educational Underachievement here. And this webinar this afternoon is hosted by Stranmillis University College. This is a really significant time for us as a college. It's our centenary year. So 100 years ago, almost to the day, we were established just a year or so after the partition of Ireland in 1921. So we've been here a long time in Belfast, and we've been interested and engaged in the area of early years education and care for a long time as well. We've got a long tradition of teaching and research interest in this particular sphere. We were the first college in Northern Ireland and possibly across the island of Ireland to offer an undergraduate degree program in early childhood studies. We also now offer a master's degree in early childhood studies and, of course, our one-year postgraduate certificate in education in early years as well. We have a strong team, an experienced multidisciplinary team of lecturers in this particular field. This afternoon, this theme is particularly relevant to us, therefore, with our expertise here at Stranmillis University College. And the issue of gender and meals in the early years is a particularly relevant topic, not just here in Northern Ireland, but nationally and internationally as well. I'm delighted that there are so many delegates. I believe that we were at capacity. We're sold out for this afternoon. So welcome to you, wherever you come from, whether you're here in Northern Ireland or across the island of Ireland or elsewhere in the UK or internationally, you're all very welcome. I hope that you enjoy this seminar. I think it'll be stimulating and challenging with a wide range of speakers, but I'm not going to tell you anymore. I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Dr. Barbara Mcconnell from the Early Childhood Studies team, who has responsibility for organizing this afternoon. And Barbara is going to set the context for this particular theme and also introduce our speakers. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of this very important afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Noel, for your introduction today. And I'd just like to add on to Noel and to welcome everybody here today. As Noel said, my name is Dr. Barbara Mcconnell, and I am a senior lecturer in early childhood studies in Stranmillis University College. And firstly, I would like to thank two of my colleagues who aren't able to make it today, but have been very involved in the organisation, Katrina Rogers and Dr. Suzanne McCartney. Both Katrina, unfortunately, has had a close family bereavement, but Suzanne has recently, just last week, had a new baby girl. So we're delighted and send Suzanne our congratulations. But I mentioned both of them because really this webinar came about following many sort of days sitting in Stranmillis in Betty's coffee shop, which many of you who have visited will know where I mean. And we've been chatting over this issue for a number of years. And in fact, it was only last week when I was doing the introduction quiz for our new intake of students that we started actually reviewing our statistics again and looking at it. Stranmillis, as Noel said, has a long history with early childhood studies, and our early childhood studies degree started in 1996 with the first cohort of graduates graduating in the year 2000. We started with a part-time route, and then from 2001 on we had a full-time route. So since 2000 we have had over 2,116 graduates from the early childhood studies degree in Stranmillis. And they have either studied with us in Stranmillis or in OMA, one of our regional colleges, or more recently in Newry. But out of those 2,116 graduates, there's only been 23 males. So really that's just over 1%, which isn't a lot. But actually, if we had been doing this webinar a few years ago, we'd have been in single figures. And we're actually really pleased at the moment. We have another sort of 6 or 7 male students on either the full-time or part-time route, currently as students in the college. But obviously this number is still very low, and it's something, you know, that we have been thinking about and looking at in college for a number of years. And I know, you know, myself and Pauline Walmsley, who you will hear from later on from the early years organisation, I know it's something that they have been considering for a number of years about the number of males within the sector. So we thought it was timely then to, you know, stop talking about the issue and start doing something about it. And really, we hope that this is the beginning of us to start doing something about that. And the first thing that we wanted to do was to see, is there interest in this area? And we're absolutely delighted that we were at capacity, as Noel said. So there's definitely interest in the area. And certainly, I hope at the end of when we get to listen to the speakers today, that we as a sector, whether it's academics, practitioners, people involved in training, whatever it is, will be able to come together and maybe put an action plan in place that we can actually do something about these lack of males in the early years. So I'm not going to talk for very much longer, apart from just to briefly introduce our speakers today. And I know they will all introduce themselves, so I'll just give a very brief overview and a bit of the running order. And we're really, really delighted to have Dr. David Brody, who is an Associate Professor of Education and the former Academic Dean of the Chair of Early Childhood Department in the EFRA College in Education in Jerusalem. And David's lifetime work has worked with young children, from a kindergarten teacher to a researcher and to an author of many books and journals. And he is the current co-chair of the Gender Balance Special Interest Group for Early Education, Childcare Education Research Association. So David, really, really looking forward to David's talk, and that he'll be able to share some of his experience and knowledge from across the world. We are very international today, and we have Dr. Joanne Mikhail, who's from the Technical Institute in Dublin, from Blanchardstown, and Joanne's PhD from UCL was in the area of gender in the early years. And Joanne has written many books and chapters and papers about the situation, and we're interested to hear what the current situation is like in the Republic of Ireland. I mentioned Pauline Walmsley is the Chief Executive for the Early Years Organisation since 2019, although has been working in the organisation and in the sector for many, many years as well. So Pauline will be able to, it's the largest organisation then in Northern Ireland, and she'll be able to give us some information and tell us about what the services are like and what the sector is like. Then we have Kevin Duggan, who's the current chair of the Southern Childcare Partnership, and Kevin's going to tell us a little bit about some of the, he's responsible for training and the quality of childcare in that region. He's going to tell us about some of the work that's happening there. We have Stuart Dickinson. Stuart is a new colleague here in Stranmillis, but we've known Stuart for many years. He was the former head of early years in Belfast Met. And, you know, drawing on his recent experience in FE and in the regional colleges, Stuart is going to give us some information about, the FE sector, as well as, we've already looked at the HE sector. And last but not least, we've got Conor Mcardle, and Conor is the South Armagh project manager for Sure Start. And Conor has been doing some wonderful work and has some real success stories about recruiting males into the early years. And we're delighted then that Conor's going to share some of those with us today. So I won't take any more time, but just to thank our speakers, and I will pass over to David, who is going to talk to us for about 45 minutes. So thank you very much, David.
Okay. Well, I would also like to thank you, Barbara, for inviting me to speak with the group today, and for suggesting this intriguing title, Who Benefits? Men Teaching Early Child Education, Who Benefits? You've already said something about my background. I will just stress that for 17 years, I was a teacher of young children. I started as a nursery caregiver and worked my way through the different ages. And I reached first grade in the United States, that's age 6. I spent 25 years as a teacher educator in Israel in early child education. And as Barbara mentioned, for the past 10 years, I've been working as I researched the topic of men in early childhood education. So why do we want to ask this question, who benefits? In unpacking the question, we essentially touch on most of the relevant discourses about men and ECEC that have been going on for the past 20, 30 years. So let's get started. So it's important to think about whose perspective we're looking at. When we ask who benefits, we need to think about who's asking the question, who's answering the question, and what their agenda might be. So let's frame this very clearly. By including more men in ECEC, are we looking at an overall goal of perpetuating the hegemonic gender regimes that exist in so many parts of the world? Or are we interested in breaking down those stereotypes and biases and paving the way for a new and more equitable way of viewing gender in society? And I'll be saying much more about those tensions throughout my lecture today. I've identified 6 different social constructions, each of which can be seen as a possible beneficiary of increased men's participation in ECEC. So if we go around the circle, starting at the top with the children, of course, we can move on to families, look at the centers in the schools, look at the men themselves, look at society, and look at the profession of ECEC. We'll examine each of these factors through a research lens. And where no research could be found, I'll bring anecdotes and illuminating stories which can help us think about the issues involved. I'll be presenting both arguments that support the benefits for each element where called for, and I will present and then deconstruct claims that have been made and are still being made regarding benefits of ECEC for some of the arguments, thus hopefully providing a more nuanced understanding of the issues involved. Before we get started, I want to share with you one piece of my own research into the field of gender balance, because I'm going to be referring back to this study throughout my talk. About 8 years ago, I decided to look at men in 6 different countries: Switzerland, the UK, Norway, USA, Israel, and Holland. I chose one man in each country. I spent a day with him in his nursery or his kindergarten, observing him, interviewed him at great length, and talked to people who were involved with his work, such as the manager and other people in his country who were involved with the whole question of men and early child education. This research includes not only interviews, but the observation of men's practice, which was kind of unusual in this type of research, and also a broad sociocultural lens. So children are at the heart of the ECEC enterprise, and so we're going to begin with them. How did they benefit from male teachers and caregivers? Men in ECEC encourage certain positive traits and dispositions among the children they work with. These include emotional agency and resilience, physical agency, and autonomy. Emotional agency and resilience, here we're referring to men's interest in supporting children in times of crisis and mishap, and encouraging them to go back and try again. A classic example is when a child falls off of a climbing structure, the man will usually pick him up, give him a hug, pat his head, and tell him to, okay, go back again, try again. That's encouraging resilience, bouncing back. With physical agency, we're talking about giving children a sense of their physical abilities through gross motor challenges, engaging in sports, and the like. Autonomy refers to encouraging the child to work things out on their own, take responsibility for their own activities. Risky physical outdoor play is related to the fact that men in general are more tolerant of risk-taking, and they show higher interest in physical activities such as rough and tumble play. Research from Norway shows that male preschool teachers are more relaxed regarding children's risky play, and they intervene less or later. This source, the ECHRAM, is the Early Childhood and Role of Men Initiative in 6 European countries. And if you don't know about it, I suggest you look them up. They've just come out with a transnational report, which is fascinating. And their goal is to promote caring among men, both teachers, fathers, and other men in society. In my own research, I found 3 characteristics of men's EC practice, similarities that cut across cultural boundaries, age, training, and the age of the children. The first is that the men love to play with children. This is an important part of the day for these teachers. And they saw this as their agenda. This is what they thought they should be doing. The director of a Norwegian daycare center told me that many of the men in his center tend to choose the floor as a venue for playing with children. Men promote higher order thinking among children. Such thinking includes opening new possibilities, looking at phenomena from different perspectives, encouraging alternative explanations, and generating and investigating hypotheses. Like the Dutch finding about autonomy, I also found that men in my study all stressed children's independence, sharing authority, and they shared their authority with the children. The men all exhibited charisma with the children, and this found expression in their positive classroom control, which I think is a marker of leadership and leads to positive classroom environment, which benefits all of the children. While some of these benefits mentioned here apply to all children, others apply specifically to boys. For example, Huckbear and Traxey found that men are less punitive with boys than their female colleagues. Let's move from the realm of social emotional benefits to formal learning outcomes. Now, this realm brings us back to the question of perspective. Whose perspective is this, and why does it matter? Do we really need to prove an effect of formal learning in order to justify men's inclusion in ECEC? So I'm going to leave that as an open question. In any case, we do have a bit of positive evidence in this regard. In Norway, they keep a lot of records and statistics, and they found a positive benefit for those children who had participated in preschool classes with a higher percentage of male teachers. They looked at the records of 2,000 children from 300 centers, and they found higher scores in language and math on tests from grades 1 to 3. Similar research was carried out in Denmark, this time looking at test scores in the 9th grade of 30,000 students, and those who had had male teachers in preschool and kindergarten outperformed the others, particularly in achievement on tests of first language ability. When asking the question, do male and female teachers have different approaches, and do these approaches vary with interactions with girls and boys, it's worthwhile to look at the tandem study from Germany. In this quasi-experimental study, 41 male and 41 female preschool teachers were each invited into a room with craft materials and tools with one child at a time. One time a boy, another time a girl. And they were told to do whatever they wanted with the materials and the tools. The sessions were recorded and interactions with children were analyzed. So here are a few of their major findings. First of all, no significant differences were found on these measures of male and female teacher behaviors: empathy, challenge, dialogic interaction, manner of cooperation, manner of communication. However, when they looked at the interaction between the gender of the teacher and the gender of the child, they did find some significant differences. Female teachers engaged in more verbal interaction with the girls and tended to observe the boys instead of verbally interacting with them. Male teachers and boys more frequently created objects with the craft materials, while the female teachers and girls created subjects. And I'm not sure what the significance of this finding is, but I think it's an interesting finding. Let's talk about the male role model argument. This has been used as an argument for including men in early childhood since the time of the first man set foot in a kindergarten. And I don't know how long ago that was. There are several arguments given for men, for for this benefit that men will be male role models. The first argument is that there's a gender gap, a feminization of teaching. It is a reality that boys' achievement lags behind that of girls, and this is thought to be due to the prevalence of female teachers. However, there is little evidence that men will make a difference for boys on the academic level. The research is very sparse. In fact, a comprehensive study from the OECD countries of 146,000 fourth graders in OECD countries found that the gender of their teachers made no difference in math and reading test scores in the fourth grade. That is, the gender of their fourth grade teacher made no difference in their achievement in math and reading in the fourth grade. A second argument is that men provide a father figure for boys from single parent female homes. Attention with this argument is the question, can a male teacher act both as a father as well as a pedagogue? A third argument is that men will help make settings in schools boy-friendly. And now the question is, can only men do this? Can't women make settings more boy-friendly? A fourth argument is that men will help bring strength in the form of power, authority, discipline, and technical competence to the setting in the classroom. Now, there's a big problem with this argument in that these are all hegemonic male traits. And perhaps we don't want to reinforce these male traits. So why are we bringing men in to bring power, authority, discipline? Which kind of male role model should men be? Men do see themselves as male role models. In fact, 99% of men who are asked the question said that yes, they see themselves as a male role model. However, they challenged the notion that this is an automatic status. Rather, they claim that the role model should be earned through respect and admiration. Further, the men saw themselves as a male role model for both boys and for girls. Although I spent quite a bit of energy just now debunking the role model theory, I raise here the possibility that the presence of a man in the preschool can have positive benefits for the families. And now we're moving on from the child to families, particularly single mother families. Knowing that the child is spending the better part of her day with men and women in caring roles is a great relief to single mothers who feel that their child is missing out. A second point to be made here is the positive connections that typically emerge between male ECEC workers and the families they work with. All the teachers in my study experienced positive relationship with the parents of the children in their care. Two of them spoke of initial skepticism among some of the parents. However, once the parents got to know them and understand their competence as excellent teachers and caregivers, these fears evaporated. Another important theme regarding benefits to families is the positive relationship that has been found between men in the centers and schools and the fathers of the children. In general, it can be said that men encourage fathers to get involved in the center activities and in their children's lives. Here's a quote from a male teacher who was particularly interested in involving men from what he called working class backgrounds and getting them involved in the center. Here's what he said. And when they come in and it's all nice pink pastel colors and flowers and women are walking around everywhere, what is in it for him at the center? We've also got to work on building up the relationship with the parents and the fathers so that you can make that next step and get involved with actual education, the care of the child, and develop that partnership thing. A more specific need in this regard is with fathers from immigrant backgrounds. Many of those fathers feel uncomfortable relating to female caregivers and teachers. Men in the role of teacher can address this need. For example, a man in my study from Basel, Switzerland, told me how he first got started in teaching. In Basel at the time, there were 20 kindergartens that were predominantly populated with Turkish immigrants. And these Turkish fathers simply would not relate to the female teachers. They wouldn't talk to them, no, nothing. So the authorities decided they would address this problem by hiring men to work in these kindergartens, and he was one of them. And he told me that it was a great success, that the fathers, once they had male teachers for their children, they were able to relate to them and get involved with kindergartens and get more involved with the children. Men in the preschool can also provide a non-traditional gender role for the fathers. Edward, an assistant director from Australia, spoke of modeling a non-traditional gender role and being a teacher to fathers. Here's what he said. This girl's dad came in my room. He picked her up pretty late, and we were just about to do another change of the nappies, and she'd done a poop. He was going to change her, and I was there and said, "Oh, do you want me to change her?" Because this father had no idea what he was doing. And he was like, "Oh, you can just teach me how to do this?" So me and him had a bit of a moment then, teaching him how to change a nappy. Another aspect of this role of father involvement comes in the form of initiatives to establish fathers groups. From the UK, Ian developed a variety of musical strategies to involve fathers, including a father's band and an all-male singing group. He revealed that in the singing group, dads could comment about some of the pleasures of fathering, which they would not be able to risk talking about at other male social settings, such as watching football or at the workplace. Now, Sullivan's study of an Australian centre, an unusual centre with 20% male staff, found that these men formed a fathers group, which was very significant for the parents. In Israel, I was told by a young man who was teaching kindergarten that many fathers approached him with questions about parenting. Now, this led to their request that he form and lead a fathers group focused on parenting. When we relate to how centers may benefit from the presence of men, we can consider the effects of gender mixed teams. Here are three different perspectives on these benefits. The first perspective, provided by Tim Borman, relates to individual job satisfaction, which in turn translates into benefits for the center in terms of positive work environment. A second perspective hails from Australia and relates to staff diversity, which men create. This diversity is thought to have potential to influence the quality of work in the workplace. Karen Thorpe quotes a female assistant teacher who describes the impact of this diversity. She said, our male educator brings different ideas to the center, something that maybe I haven't thought of. Another perspective addresses the calming influence that men were found to contribute to the work atmosphere in a daycare center. We see this in Santos's study of men in ECEC in Brazil, where men's more practical and relaxed postures were considered to lead to more productive handling of problem situations. This was echoed in the Australia study, where a female teacher explained how the men diffused heightened emotion within their female-dominated workplace. She said, "The guys just bring a different energy. To me, it really calms the whole workforce down." Interestingly, in this same center, this gender binary was challenged by the male staff, who claimed just the opposite. They claimed that the women provided emotional stability. Finally, mention should be made regarding another type of benefit from gender mixed teams. Coming from Norway, where gender equality is highly valued, the gender mixed teams were found to enhance what they called gender equality work in the center. I'd like to talk about tokenism. Oh, sorry, that's the next slide. There's the question. Do gender mixed teams indeed exhibit more favorable team culture? The evidence for this positive outcome is also challenged by other evidence. When women show stereotyped attitudes about the role of men in the centers, this can lead to tensions in the workplace. In fact, Creamers and others found that tasks were divided according to gender traditional roles in many German daycare centers. I'll give you two classic examples. In mixed teams, men tended to deal with wild and noisy boys more frequently than women, and they were expected to do so. In addition, men were asked to be responsible for computers. Feilman's research on gender-related territories is very interesting. He claims that the center or the kindergarten is really a female territory, and that men who come to work there are not welcomed, and they're pushed away from interacting with children. And they're encouraged and rewarding for taking on other kinds of roles, such as custodial roles, lifting, carrying things, repairing things. And they're put out on the field to play sports with the very active little boys. So we might conclude here that the positive effects of gender mixed teams seems to be related to more open and less stereotypic attitudes of the female staff. When those conditions are present, many benefits accrue to the center, but in their absence, there can be a toxic atmosphere that detracts from smooth functioning. Now I'll talk about tokenism. Some leaders accentuate the inclusion of one man on their staff, and thus turning that individual into a token who represents all men, yet limits his full integration into the daily work routine. One man in Germany claimed that being the token man turned him into an economic commodity with a value placed on his head. We called him Matthias in the study. Matthias sees himself as merchandise to be sold by a shopkeeper. This reaction creates a feeling of shiftiness or ambivalence. His gender is advertised, but he rejects the praise. This phenomenon of tokenism is related to also to how women in a center tend to other the men working there. This was found in Australia, where men were valued but seen as other than us, the women. Let's move on to the men themselves. How does their career decision benefit them? In my study, I found three answers to this question. The first is that these men were attracted to working with children, and by crossing over the gender boundary, moving into the center, choosing this career, they fulfilled this need to work with children, which they had identified. Another phenomenon was that some of the men found that working with children brought them back to their own childhood. One even said, I discovered the little child in myself. A third aspect of identity fulfillment is that these men were professionally satisfied. They knew they were doing a good job. They were doing a professional job, and they were fulfilling their need to be a competent professional. Let's move on to resilience. The fact that men are a small minority in a context mainly dominated by women means that they are portrayed as persons with enormous resilience and courage as they have to cope with embarrassing situations and social pressures. In another study, which I did with my Israeli colleague Hagit Borziv, we looked at agency among men in ECEC. We found a surprising outcome. Many of these men constructed a dual or hybridized agency that included both male and female components. They found strength to move ahead by accessing both types of agencies as personal resources. Men are highly visible in centers, kindergartens, and classrooms. Their narratives that report on mistakes or their successes are more noted than those of women, thus placing higher expectations for excellent performance. And this, of course, can be very problematic and place stress on the men. In her interviews with female directors and managers who had hired men, Jones found that they looked for the right kind of man. This is a construct which they drew from available masculinities. This paradigm includes four elements. The right kind of man should be, number one, enthusiastic about young children and hold an early years philosophy. Number two, a listener, not arrogant. Number three, a team member with a sense of humor. And number four, macho, not a wimp. Of course, these conflicting expectations, when subtly communicated to the men, caused quite a bit of consternation and tension for them in performing their duties. When men cross the gender boundary and move into early child education, their masculinity comes into question. How do they deal with this? In my study, I found that some of the men had in their mind's eye a female kindergarten teacher who they saw as the ideal, the perfect teacher. And they tried to emulate those aspects of her, which they considered to be professional aspects. As they begin to work and find their way with children, find their way in the classroom, find their way with parents, they begin to realize that, hey, I'm a man. Some of the things I do as a man are pretty good. They're pretty effective. And this affected a change in their awareness. And in doing so, they deconstructed the feminine ideal. They reconstructed a masculine ideal. And they created or constructed for themselves a new masculine identity, which in fact reclaimed some of their initial masculine identity. And this masculine identity as a nursery caregiver, as a kindergarten teacher, moved with them through their career. Two researchers from the UK, Byrne and Pratt, report that a large majority of men who enter teaching at the lower grades are promoted to school management positions, certainly in higher proportions than their female colleagues. They found different responses among the men to this, what they call career advantage. First was the attacked man, the men who felt attacked by their female colleagues for having this advantage, this unfair advantage. There were the accepted men. These are men who don't feel attacked, rather they feel acceptance of their role as worthy candidates for promotion by their female colleagues. Then there are those who deny the advantage. These are called the promotion men. And then there are men who totally identify with the promotion advantage and justify it and say, yeah, this is the way it is, though others are embarrassed by it and are critical of the practice, which of course requires conformity to the school system and so forth. And there are others who step off the promotion ladder. They choose not to participate in this process and pass up promotion opportunities in favor of remaining in the classroom. So let's zoom out to the societal level and take a look at how society as a whole might benefit from men's increased participation in ECEC. Going back to our cartoon about perspectives, I will fully own up to my own perspective, which values gender equality and gender sensitivity. Since these values underlie the way I see the world and define my personal goals, I can clearly state that men in the profession, I believe, will help society move in these directions. But how so? Men who choose this career are clearly challenging prevailing societal gender norms. Santos calls this social deconstruction of gender stereotypes. Plaisir and colleagues see this career decision as pushing back at traditional stereotypes and, in a much broader sense, redefining masculinity. This is based on a view that caring masculinities, which will be discussed shortly, are diametrically opposed to hegemonic masculinities that are currently in play in most of our societal interactions. According to the Ekaram Transnational Report of this year, the growing presence of men in ECEC presents an opportunity to re-examine societally prescribed dictates about the capabilities of men, the unfounded accusations of the dangers of bringing them into the caregiving role, and the many positive benefits which they offer to the education and care of young children. In my study, I was able to identify components of masculine forms of caring. First being focus on the needs of the child. Secondly, physical manifestations, hugging, touching, holding, lap sitting, speaking gently. Now, men didn't do every man didn't do all of these. There is this surveillance that goes on for men, but they chose what felt comfortable for them. They showed great empathy and compassion. There was a physical leaning in towards the child. And in situations where men did not feel comfortable to touch children, there was intense eye contact. And all of these together I identify as masculine forms of caring. On a practical societal level, men's increased participation in the ECEC workforce can be seen as one solution to the acute labor shortage. For example, in Australia, this year, there's an estimated shortfall of 16,000 workers. In Germany, by the year 2025, they will need another 372,000 ECE staff. In England, in the recent expansion of the free ECEC entitlement for 3- and 4-year-olds with working parents from 15 to 30 hours per week, there's an increasing demand for the number of ECEC workers. The OECD report, which you see here, delineated several reasons for the shortage, and I'm sure that these are familiar to you. I want to bring you their fourth reason. Here's what they say. We are faced with the indisputable fact that across countries, the ECEC workforce is overwhelmingly female, reducing the pool of available workers by half. Now that we've zoomed out to society as a beneficiary of men's participation in the ECEC workforce, let's zoom back in and take a look at the profession. Can a masculine style of caring stretch the boundaries of ECEC professionalism? Professionalism in ECEC may look different for men than for women. Furthermore, we might consider that the profession may grow and improve as it examines and possibly adopts some of these male practices. On a more mundane and practical level, we can talk about improvement of salaries and working conditions in ECEC. And I have to say this cynically, but it seems to be true that in professions where there is a majority of males, the salaries are higher. Studies show that sectorial gender segregation is an important determinant of the gender pay gap and highlight that the socioeconomic status of an occupation improves when a greater number of men enter it. In order for those benefits to kick in for ECEC, we would need to reach 20% or higher. And unfortunately, we're a long way off. We go back to my starting point with these 6 different areas of 6 different factors that may benefit from men in ECEC. I'd like to do a brief review. The benefits for children are already there. Men are already working with young children. Those children who are fortunate to have men as their caregivers are enjoying these benefits that I've outlined. And the same for families. In the centers and schools, the situation is a bit different. We're in a situation where in centers where there are still stereotype attitudes towards the men, the benefits are not there yet. However, in centers where there is respect for the men, there is a non-gendered view of what men should be doing, where there's true integration of the men into the staffs, these centers are greatly benefiting. For the men themselves, the benefits are already there. Those who've chosen to work in the career are getting a great deal of satisfaction from it. Some of the tensions in their lives could be resolved as according to the different arguments that I've presented, and that would improve their lives. However, I can say on a grand scale that men truly benefit from working in ECEC, though they don't all stay. There's unfortunately a big dropout rate. Society, the benefits for society are different. Here, I see that there's a potential for benefits in society in terms of reconstructing constructing from anew the way we view gender. And I think that the men in ECEC could be a critical force in making those societal changes. And the same goes for the profession. As men continue to work in the profession and they grow in numbers, hopefully their way of doing things will be seen as a legitimate alternative and will improve professional practice all around. Considering all of those we serve in ECEC, the children and their families, let's talk about a gender egalitarian society. This includes the relevance of nurturing gender-sensitive practitioners, which implies versatility, a willingness to listen and respond to children, to allow children to be who they are without preconceived gender norms and constraints. Likewise for colleagues in the workplace. This would also entail developing gender-flexible pedagogy, which opens up wonderful possibilities for all of us. Rohrman argues that there are good reasons for expecting both male and female ECEC professionals to develop both masculine and feminine aspects of their professional identity in their work with children, instead of avoiding stereotype behaviors and trying to be gender neutral. This dual identity approach opens up a new perspective. Rather than trying to eliminate gender by diminishing masculine and feminine behavior, men could develop a vivid masculinity and express feminine traits and qualities at the same time. In this view, behaving in typically masculine or feminine ways and working against stereotype expectations would not be contradictory, but could indicate flexibility and a willingness to overcome dichotomous binary understandings of gender. I'd like to end my talk with a quote from a male practitioner whose pseudonym is Steve. He works at the Acorn Center, which is not a pseudonym. It's a center which has all male staff. And he says the following: "You can't be too stereotypical toward your own gender. It just doesn't work. You can't be the masculine man. You can't be the feminine woman. Neither of them would work in this situation. It's aspects of both. It gets combined. Being a mother and father at the same time, you have to be able to do both. You've got to be able to switch." So I end my presentation. These are my references. If you would like a copy, you can let me know, and I'll send you the PowerPoint, and we'll move on.
David, thank you so much for your presentation there. That was so interesting. And, you know, was just noting down comments and references as we were going along. But, you know, everything that you said resonated so much with conversations that I've had, either with some of our other panel speakers today, or, you know, conversations with colleagues. So thank you for that. I suppose I forgot to say at the beginning, if anybody, we will have a question and answer session at the end, and if anybody has any comments or questions, we will take some questions from the panel, but please put them into the chat comment as well, and I will you know, be presenting them and directing them to David at the end. So thank you for that, David. We will go on to our next speaker, and we have Dr. Joanne Mikhail from the Republic of Ireland, who is going to respond a little bit to David's work and tell us about the situation in some of her research and from the Republic of Ireland. So thank you, Joanne.
Joanne, I think you're on mute. Sorry, I forget to put the mouthpiece down. Thank you, Barbara. Just bear with me 1 second and I will just try and set up my screen share. Sorry now, for some reason it's, okay. Okay, are you seeing my slides there?
Yes, all good.
And in their correct format?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Barbara, for that introduction, and thank you, David, for a really interesting presentation there. My name is Joanne Mikhail. I'm a lecturer in early childhood in the Technological University of Dublin, and I'm based out in Blanchardstown, and I've been working on the early childhood programme there since 2010. My doctoral research, as Barbara mentioned, is on men in early childhood in Ireland, and I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what that looks like from the perspective of the Republic. A lot of what I'll comment on from my doctoral findings will reflect some of what David has presented already, because one of the things that's kind of consistent across different contexts is some of those things that David has mentioned, and I'll come back to those. I just wanted to start with just a kind of a brief context of the early childhood sector itself, because it will feed into some of the comments that I will be making in relation to men's participation. Sorry. There we go. The early childhood sector in the Republic has been growing rapidly over the last 20 years or so. So it started off quite small, and as more and more women entered the workforce, obviously the need for childcare, as it was considered then, increased. So there's been a move in recent years from a focus on having children cared for so that women could go into the workforce, to actually focusing on what is quality provision for children and recognizing early childhood as a distinct period for education and care. And then in the last few years, there has been some developments around minimum qualifications, and more degree level courses have begun to emerge. Recently, we had the professional award criteria and guidelines introduced, which puts all of our degree level programs in universities on a level 8 4-year honours degree program. And they all have to meet certain criteria so that there's consistency across the qualification levels of our graduates leaving our universities and going into the sector. That said, there is a difficulty with, sorry, are my slides moving along there?
Yes, moving along.
Yep.
Okay, I think. Yep.
Perfect, great. So that said, we are having difficulties with recruitment and retention in the sector in general, which I think is probably reflected elsewhere as well. So here's just a brief visual of the early childhood sector growth, and you can see there the blue is the total number of early childhood educators since 1999. So you can see that it has increased quite significantly. And the orange there then suggests the number of women in the sector, which you can see there largely follows the graph. And the little grey line down the end, unfortunately, are the number of men in early childhood in Ireland. They represent, it has varied slightly over the years, but they represent between 1.8 and 2%. The last two sector profiles haven't given a clear number. The most recent one there produced in May showed that it was 2%, but they didn't actually specify the number of men against the number of women. And I think that's problematic in terms of, if we can't see where the problem or the scale of the problem is, we can't necessarily address it. So thinking about how men have been the focus of developments over the course of the growth of the early childhood sector, they haven't really featured all that much. We had a publication, the National Children's Strategy, back in 1999, which reflected the European Commission recommendations of that time with a 20% target, which at this moment in time, given the graph that we've just looked at, feels a little bit unrealistic. And there have been no real significant attempts to actually do anything about increasing the recruitment of men. In 2004, there was the establishment of a Men in Childcare Network, and that's still going, and they provide support and guidance, particularly to men who are in the sector, and as a minority group, it provides a support network for them. Their information is currently hosted on the National Children's Network website, and I've put a link to it there in the slides. The competence requirements for early childhood education and care that was published in 2011 looked at kind of a range of competencies of an early childhood educator. And while they didn't go into a huge amount of focus on increasing the number of men in early childhood, they did recommend a target of 10%. And I quote the competence requirements here because the professional award criteria and guidelines, which I just referred to, that the university courses are now mapped to, was very much influenced by these competence requirements. So it does kind of form the basis of our current provision in the university sector. And then we have a diversity and equality guidelines, which were published in 2006 and then updated in 2016. Now they're focused more on diversity and equality in the early childhood classroom and supporting children. But they do state that childcare is not just a career option for women. The importance of children interacting with men in the childcare environment needs to be recognised. So there's a recognition that there should be an increase of men in the sector, but there hasn't really been any movement towards making that a reality. So just some of the, I know I have a short amount of time, so some of the, and you might shout at me if I'm running over, some of the things that have come up from my doctoral research, and as I said already, they'll echo a lot of what David has said. From my experience, I carried out some research on men in early childhood, their female colleagues. I also looked at career guidance educators. I did focus groups with those, and I also did parental surveys. And the key findings that I think come from that research from south of the borders perspective is that gendered expectations influence both men and women's assumptions, aspirations, and practices. And what I mean by that is boys and girls are not seeing men and women in caring roles together, and therefore early childhood as a career option is not visible to boys. Stereotyped and gendered career choices and subject choices are not being challenged in school, and boys are not getting a taste. One of the things I found with my educators was they didn't know anything about early childhood, but once they got a taste, it drew them in. So it's not visible essentially to young men as a career option. The gendered notions permeate all levels of society, and that includes things like men being expected to be breadwinners, therefore the current status and pay of the profession is influencing whether they can remain on in it. Down to on a more micro level where men are expected to do the DIY, be with the boys, you know, certain behaviours are policed. There's suspicions around risk or concerns about risk and so on. So there's a lot of gendered assumptions and gendered notions that are still there. The other thing, and David mentioned it in relation to that whole role model argument, men are expected to both reinforce typical masculine behaviours and challenge gender stereotypes. And they not only are expected to do it, they often expect it of themselves. So I had one man say, I can just as easily play dolls with the girls as play football with the boys. So he was, challenging the notion of the type of activity he could engage in, but he was still very much gendering the activities that the children were involved in.
Joanne, just to note the time, okay?
Yeah, I'll pop along then. I just comment there on the need for gender sensitive pedagogy and leadership, and I know David mentioned on that as well. So just finally, I can move my slides along. There's been a number of, I'm going to skip along, but there's been a number of developments in the last number of years. Our most recent early childhood strategy has a focus on development of the workforce. We have a new workforce development plan now, which has specifically mentioned promoting gender balance and diversity in early childhood. And just this day last week, our early childhood educators have had an employment regulation order, which has put all of their salaries on a legal footing. And basically there are salary scales based on occupational roles. And the intention is to increase that over the next number of years. And hopefully that might alleviate some of the issues around the status and so on of the profession. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Joanne, thank you so much. Apologies just for jumping in and really want to find out more about some of what, what's happening down in the Republic of Ireland there, but really interesting to hear some of the work that you're doing with the post-primary children and about the recruitment into the sector as well. And certainly I think that's something that we need to think about and to target here. So thank you for that. I will move quickly on and we will pass on to Pauline, who's going to share some of her thoughts and practice there on it from Copenhagen, where she is at the moment. So thank you, Pauline.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for the invitation for this afternoon. Look, just very quickly in terms of early years, the Organisation for Young Children, we promote high quality early education and care services. We have a sizable membership across the provision of daycare services. We provide an early years specialist support service to the preschool education programme. We are lead body or employing body for 10 Sure Starts, and we administer the £3 million annual pathway fund on behalf of the Department of Education to over 176 groups. So that I suppose gives us a fair bit of span right across the early childhood workforce. And look, just thank David for a very, very insightful presentation, and also Joanne. And I absolutely agree with much of what David has said there in terms of the need to end gender stereotyping, the need to look at improving learning outcomes across all cultures, and modelling, I suppose, non-traditional gender roles. And I suppose in relation to Northern Ireland, I think that we cannot, because of our history, underestimate the importance and the richness of a diverse environment and looking at that across all characteristics. And I want to celebrate the many males who do actually already work in the sector and provide an excellent contribution across a range of services. The problem is, of course, that there is not enough of them, and not enough of them by a long shot. In my organisation at Early Years, I am actually, having seen the first couple of presentations, at this stage proud to say that 7% of our employees are males. But what's most important to me is that if I segregate out the professional employees who have a front-facing role, i.e. those who work in Sure Start or who work in the daycare services that we run. These are early years employees, early years, the Organisation for Young Children. 8% are male, and that represents a 3% increase on our figures last year. And I suppose Conor will provide you with the detail on the impact of that at local level. But I suppose as a CEO, I'm pleased that we're moving, albeit slowly, in the right direction. And what particularly pleases me is those 8% are services that work with children birth to 4. So I think that really is a good news story in the context of Northern Ireland, and indeed the wider island, as we've seen from Joanne's address. And I know Kevin will address some of the wider statistics, but I would agree with Joanne's point in relation to Northern Ireland as well. We don't have enough detail in terms of number of meals, what types of services they're in, etc. And that makes it very hard to set realistic targets. I am hopeful we will be issuing a qualification census here later in October, and I am hopeful that as part of that we will also have more information in terms of gender within the sector. Barbara, as you've said, we've been talking about this for many years, and we've been informed over the years by people like Dr. Jan Peters, Dr. Glenda McNaughton, who was very much, Glenda is again coming from that gender perspective, and we have been involved in a number of campaigns. I think we have to be realistic. A survey that Early Years conducted just a few years ago, 39% of members had actively tried to recruit males, and they identified the following barriers. 51% perceived it as a strictly female profession, 46% had perceived stereotyping around the work, 36% perceived that there was lower pay, 29% lack of awareness of the role, and 18% perceived lack of opportunities for advancement as barriers to males entering the workplace. I think in Early Years we should roll up our sleeves and issue that survey again, to see if those are still the views from the wider sector. A couple of things then that we have become involved in together with Playboard. We had initiated the Employers Forum, and I think both Playboard and ourselves were able to really traction the ability to influence and be a champion for new entrants to the sector. We undertook a number of initiatives like careers fairs. We trained people in the sector to be ambassadors within their own community, and we were always very careful to ensure that our materials adequately impacted both a male and female audience. And in terms of providing that, which is some of what the speakers have talked about. At Early Years ourselves, we have always had a partnership with a local secondary school in Belfast, where we've had placements for boys within our organisation. And indeed, many of our male employees from Early Years have also participated with promotional materials in relation to Stranmillis and in relation to the Employers Forum, and I'm very grateful to them for their thoughtful provocations around that. We also continue to learn from other industries. We've partnered with Allstate. Allstate is a company who seek to employ more females, so we've been learning from some of their strategies, and we continue to engage with our own employees in terms of what the challenges are and what we need to do to create a more inclusive and diverse working environment. Within our own organisation, we have focused on our recruitment campaigns. How are we including males? We've focused on our selection panels. We've paid great attention to our exit interviews, and we have used champions within the organisation to try and keep it a live issue. So I think there's a lot of really positive work to build on and to influence. But most of all, I think organisations like ours, and I'm grateful for the over 60 people that are on this call today, because we all collectively have a responsibility to challenge inequality. And in order to promote diversity, we need to ensure appropriate status and recognition for our sector and for all of those who work with young children. And in particular, Joanne, I was going to highlight the recent announcement in Ireland, and I think it'll be wonderful to come back next year and in the coming years and see the impact of that on the profile of the workforce. We need men in our sector. We need them to challenge our perceptions and our stereotypes. We need more men and we need more types of men. And I think David alluded to that, reflecting all aspects of masculinity in today's world and in our wider communities. And most of all, I suppose we need gender aware practices and practitioners, and that's again where Stranmillis and others have a role in terms of pre-service training and CPD, and David fascinated by that notion of gender flexible pedagogy. And it really, really matters that we recruit men into early childhood in order to dismantle those stereotypes. And as David said, it actually matters because we can no longer afford to ignore half the population either in our recruitment drives and our staffing shortages. And finally, as I opened with, I think in Northern Ireland, above all places, it matters because above all, it is diversity that will provide the richest learning environment for children, the richest working environment for staff, and more cohesion and connection within our communities. Thank you.
Pauline, thank you so much for that. Really delighted to hear some of the statistics and some of the work, particularly in targeting and in recruitment. And I think definitely it's something that we can look at, that visual images. And I'm visualizing a media campaign here. Will be how we can do that and how we can make sure that we certainly start targeting into schools as well. I will move on then to Kevin. Kevin Duggan from the Childcare Partnerships, and thank you, Kevin. I'll pass you over.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Barbara says, my name is Kevin Duggan, and I'm the Southern Childcare Partnership Manager and one of the Sure Start leads within the Strategic Planning and Performance Group, which was formerly the Health and Social Care Board in Northern Ireland, who take lead within the childcare partnerships across Northern Ireland. Really excited to be involved in this event today. I have been working in sort of early years in the Sure Start context from about 2007. So I was a Sure Start manager for about 10 years before, as everyone says, poacher turned gamekeeper, and you move over to the commissioning side of the house as well. And during that time, the role of men and fathers was very sort of paramount in everything we were doing in Sure Start, and something my colleague Conor Mcardle would certainly pick up on his presentation. But even reflecting back from that journey of 2007 till about 2017 as a frontline manager, I only ever had one male staff member across 2 different Sure Start projects that I managed. Now, funny enough, I'll name drop him because he's on this call today, Keith Cullen, who I do believe was a Stranmillis graduate. And I have to say, Keith is a wonderful example of the power of bringing a male practitioner into a group, both as a sort of a role model, but also in terms of adapting services and targeting mum, dad, children, granny, granda into the early years and supporting children. So it does work really, really well. And I think a lot of what we're talking about today is how we make it better and how we really promote men across the sector for the benefit of our whole sector, not just the sort of the male cohort wanting to come into it. I've been involved in a range of events this last number of years, even pre-COVID, of doing a men and childcare event with a lot of colleagues in this call as well in the southern area, where we tried to get a lot of schoolboys in and hear about some of the male role models. But it is a challenge to keep that going with such low numbers. But I think the onus is on us to try and make things work. So we bit about the Northern Ireland context, if I can get my slides to go here. Again, like a lot of sort of what people have touched on, it's hard to get an exact figure on a lot of the settings information, and we are working on that within the childcare partnership at present, around a sort of a bit of a head count, but we are talking about 1% of the workforce depending on the type of childcare setting you're looking at. And again, that will vary greatly, and it will be much less than settings such as child maintenance settings until a sure start setting. So it will vary, but that's sort of a rough figure of where we are and ties in with figures that other folks are given. I think one of the big issues we have in Northern Ireland, I think it's a bit of an elephant in the room, and Dr. David Brody and Joanna picked up on it in their presentation as well. We have to acknowledge the strong bias that still exists in Northern Ireland in general towards males as caregivers. And I would take it a bit further and challenge everyone. I would say it's both in terms of fathers and practitioners, with the exception of a few services like Sure Start across Northern Ireland. We tend to run a very deficit model of men's services and father services. It's the bad dads club, the just out of prison dads club. We don't generically offer father services. Now, I think the knock on that has for trying to attract practitioners, we have a deficit model with males full stop in early childhood. And I think that has a really huge impact when you're trying to encourage more men into the sector, when they aren't seeing wholesale father services being offered, both in health, education, and community and voluntary settings, in the same way we see mother services being offered. So I would have a very strong hunch on that as well, how that is also impacting on our ability to get more male practitioners when they don't see themselves as part of the service population, i.e. we're not offering them services as fathers in the same way we offer mothers. And some of that can go very, very, even at the school gates, at health visiting appointments. We're asking mummy how she's doing. We're asking mummy how she's getting on with the baby, rightly so. But are we always asking 50% of the time as well, how's daddy getting on? And I think that all feeds into the overall issues we have as males, as caregivers, and wanting to encourage them in to become early years professionals as well. And I think it's fair to say, and a lot of people touch on it, we don't have a clear effort in place to try and target the gender imbalance. Now, that's not to be critical. It's where do you start from when we're such a low base in terms of trying to attract particularly males into the wider childcare sector. We're at such a low base, it can be very hard, one, to find role models who are also doing their day jobs, to also be out involved in promoting the careers, challenging policy makers, trying to push forward while also being practitioners. So the onus is on us all. And I think this is a wonderful example Stranmillis have done today of trying to bring everyone together to have the conversation and begin the partnerships, because it's not insurmountable, but it is a long journey ahead of us. And we're also in a very post-conflict situation here in Northern Ireland. And I think that also plays into a lot of the male stereotypes and only reinforces the gender imbalances as well, in terms of what we perceive the role of men to be, both as workers, employees, and as fathers. But as Pauline touched on as well, the other biggie is we can't ignore it any longer, for the very simple reason is we have a massive workforce shortage across the sector, particularly in the early years of children's lives. We have very small pools of females now applying for jobs, let alone males. So we are really struggling to fill posts across the sector, whether that be daycare, sure starts, after schools, whatever it might be. We're struggling full stop. But we're starting from a base where we ignore 50% of the population when we think about an eligible workforce. So bar the practical, wonderful impact that men can play in children's lives, from an employment point of view, we're starting at 50% of the population to find employees, and we need to move to 100 to help address the wider workforce issues that we're having across Northern Ireland. And the promotion of male role models, I think that's been said quite a few times and comes through very strongly. We need to see the positive images of men. A lot of the Sure Start centres would do that very visibly in terms of how they're offering services to men, to dads, posters on the walls, very, very simple stuff like that. We also need to hear the voice of male practitioners. And we've done a few events over the years, and I can see Peter nodding away on this call as well, Peter McCartney, who's been involved, and Richard as well, in terms of trying to promote men as role models. And I think that's also the way forward. We need to get what men we have out front and center, particularly with younger boys, particularly school-age boys, before they make their career choices. There's no point going to 17 and 18-year-olds. The paths are already been decided. We need to get very early into secondary school to make this a viable career for lots of young men coming through our system. And the other big elephant in the room is the low pay. Until we start paying our female workforce right, we certainly won't be attracting any more than the 1% of the male workforce in. And Dr. David Brody picked that up much more eloquently than me. We need to sort the pay issue full stop if we want to retain our female staff, let alone raise the male barrier from less than 1% in the sector. So it is a massive, massive consideration for anyone embarking on a career, male or female, is how much they're going to get paid, particularly in a world with a cost of living crisis, is really biting our workforce, let alone our families. So what's missing in Northern Ireland? Well, it's all about the P's for me. As I've touched on a bit there, the promotion to young men of an early years career has to begin at school. We have to be going in and raising this at 12, 13, 14-year-old age, when they're already beginning to think about career choices, when a lot of the gender stereotypes are starting to embed in, a bit like what maybe would have been done with nursing years ago, where nursing is a much more viable career path for men. We need to get in and help shape those young male minds to give them the opportunity and to see their role models, male role models within our sector. Pay, that has to be sorted. Do you know what I mean? I think for any long-term employment strategy within the sector, male or female, we have to improve it for everyone, but particularly in the sort of onus of wanting to attract more men into the sector. Partnerships to work on solutions. And again, I commend Stranmillis for bringing this gathering here today to talk about it. And I do think that's that holistic approach. We need to be with schools, employers, FE colleges, universities, strategic planning, performance group, government departments, everyone together, because it's going to have to be an all hands to the wheel to try and make such a monumental change in a workforce profile that's 99+% female. Progression routes as well. So it's not about just coming in, it's about sustaining your career path. And Dr. David picked that up very well in his presentation, that there's males coming in across, but they tend to leave. So that, the progression and the sort of the old dominance as the breadwinner still prevails. So we need to have progression routes across the early years career pathway to keep people embedded within their journey for over a 40+ career. Positive discrimination. It's hard to know exactly what we would make that look like, but I do think once we start finding these young men, start getting them into colleges, getting them trained up, we need to find a way to automatically get them in to the workplace as quick as possible before their eyes are turned by other careers. And I think that sort of whole notion of positive discrimination in employment is something we may have to consider to try and retain the men that we do see coming through. The peer role models, and I would make that on two fronts. I think dads and fatherhood needs to be much more visible in society, in the services that we're running, so that men in general can see themselves in the settings they're bringing children to. And I think that's really, really important. If you're not seeing all of us value fatherhood in a positive light, you're far less likely to attract male practitioners into any setting, full stop. And a pledge to change. I'm a great believer in events like this, but we need some way of getting people to sign up to a charter, to some sort of a pledge to say that they're on board. And you commend organisations who are very proactive in this, but there has to be some sort of way of pledging to this rather than just lots of good words and talk that we can sign people up to change. But I really commend this as a wonderful stepping stone on our way to improve those statistics of men in our sector. Thanks very much.
Kevin, thank you very much for that. You've certainly left us with a lot of P's to think about there. And I had been writing down some sort of summary points as people are going through, and you've very succinctly, thrown the gauntlet down for us. So we're delighted for that. I'm going to pass over to Stuart now, who's going to talk about some of his experience within the FE sector as well. So.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Barbara, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me along this afternoon. Some really interesting insights this afternoon. I found it quite an affirming afternoon, because there's lots of cross-cutting themes there, lots of similarities between us all, and look forward to take this work forward in some form as we move forward. As Barbara said, I'm a senior lecturer here at Stranmillis University College, but prior to taking up this role in March of this year, I initially worked as a primary school teacher, and then I moved into the further education sector, and I worked there for almost 15 years. And since 2012, I was appointed as a lecturer in early years in education. And then over the last 6 years, up until March of this year, I was head of childhood studies at Belfast Met. So in terms of setting it into some sort of context, In any given year within the Centre for Childhood Studies, we would have had around 500 full and part-time students enrolling on a range of programmes from level 1 to level 5 in the field of early years and play work. And in line with today's conversations, it's quite similar in that in any given year, around 2% of our students would have been male. And, you know, we identified this as an issue, and we tried our best to think about ways of promoting that and encouraging male students to apply and hopefully eventually enroll. And interestingly enough as well, in terms of the staff team in childhood studies, out of a staff of around 30, around 6% were male, and I include myself in that statistic. But other gender imbalances existed as well in other areas of the college. So for example, similar patterns were to be seen in areas such as construction and plumbing and joinery and those kind of trades. And it was quite interesting because the centre that I was leading was almost entirely female, and then my colleague who was leading up the Centre for Construction, which was predominantly male, she was female. So we always had conversations about this, and you know, we did look at ways to sort of encourage more males and to raise the profile. And Joanne used the word visibility there, and that's very much at the centre of what I'm going to talk about today. And Pauline referred to the idea of student ambassadors, and I know that's something that we had looked at the time in terms of within the construction industry. I know my colleague had looked at women in STEM events, looking at promoting women through skills competitions and so on. And I think there's lots of transferability here in all of this, and I think that could easily be transferred within, you know, the field of early years as well, within the FE and the HE sector. Interestingly enough, I think from my experience, and I'm only talking from the perspective of my experience, but I always found there were multiple barriers, you know, young men faced in terms of making applications to the centre, in terms of applying for early years programmes in particular. And that often centred around, I think, perceptions, particularly from their families, and that influence. And I know Dr. David Brody has mentioned that this afternoon, and those societal attitudes as well that David, you referred to, particularly around stereotypical gender roles. And anecdotally, I was going to tell this story in terms of my experience of that. And I remember on one occasion, a young male had come to an open day, and he was with his mom and dad, and he was very interested in enrolling on a play work programme. And we often find that male students were very interested in that field, working in the after schools sector. And I remember saying to him, had you thought about early years childcare as another option? And I remember his mom sort of chipping in and saying, oh, I didn't think he would be allowed to study childcare because he was a boy. So at a very grassroots level, you know, it's interesting that, you know, I know, David, you referred to gender related territory there, and she actually had viewed that a very sort of mutual space on a college programme as exactly that. And it was often about changing attitudes. Another example as well was when I remember a young man had enrolled on a programme, and we were out on an educational trip, and it was a team building exercise. And I think, you know, he seemed quite anxious. He seemed quite, you know, out of sorts. And I had put it down to the fact that, you know, whatever activity we were doing, he didn't feel particularly comfortable with it. But upon further exploration, it emerged that he was actually within his community. And he said to me, you know, I was worried that someone would see me and realize what I was studying. And that was very impactful for me. And it made me think about, you know, really how brave these young gentlemen are. And against the odds, these two young men actually went on to achieve really great things. One went into the just to extend their studies through higher education, and the other one ended up working with young children. So despite all of those challenges, you know, I was thinking of that analogy of salmon, you know, leaping up. you know, the waterfall or whatever, Swan. It was a bit like that, and they, despite it all, and it shouldn't be that difficult. You know, it shouldn't be that difficult. And you know, I suppose it's made me think. It had made me think at the time of, I suppose it's that I think Einstein had said, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So during my time at, you know, leading the Centre for Childhood Studies, I'd tried to increase the visibility of male students. And I think Kevin made a reference to that as well, something just really simple. For example, our literature, our prospectus reflecting that sort of gender balance, you know, were visually, that acceptability of male workers working with children was there very, very visually. Simple things also like having male students at open days so that they could talk to other male and female prospective students, talking about the program and encouraging them. Online testimonies are very powerful as well. And I think this has come up as well, you know, about charting that journey. You know, where does my journey start and what is the potential end point of that? What will I become at the end of this? And often that's very confusing, particularly in the vocational sector. You know, there's so many different qualifications. There's diplomas, extended diplomas or whatever. And there's a lot around perception and understanding around that. And I know Dr. Purdy has published with others a report into that just recently, and that has come very much to the fore. Our marketing teams would also have worked with schools. I think on the back of what I think it's what Joanne had said, you know, she was talking about taster sessions, and I think there's maybe a little bit of work to be done there with same-sex schools in not just going out to talk about something theoretically, but actually bringing young males into the settings, into the colleges, you know, even to simulate that environment and to demystify that for them. And I think that's something that just to think about kind of moving forward. Just with all of those interventions, I can't hand on heart say that made a huge amount of difference. But even if it made a difference to one person, you know, that was enough. And Pauline, your statistics there are so encouraging. It's made me feel very buoyant about the whole thing, actually, because it does seem that progress is being made. But I really do believe that, you know, we all have a role to play in all of this. And I think it's not just the FE sector, the HE sector, it's all of us coming together. And I think we have that shared vision today. And I think in order to build a more representative workforce, it's everyone's responsibility to embrace this issue so that we begin to see that cultural shift in attitudes towards young males and their role within the early years sector. So thank you very much.
Stuart, thank you so much for that and for some of the suggestions. As I know I'm certainly scribbling down and writing them down as well. And I see I've been keeping an eye on the chat box, and we will come back to the questions that Peter McCartney has put one up about. There's a dedicated training course for males in Scotland, which has been quite successful. So, you know, lots of things that we'll be able to think about and hopefully discuss after this. I will pass this over to our last speaker today, just who is going to share Conor Mcardle from South Armagh. Sure, starting, he is hopefully going to share with us some of the success stories that he has had working recruiting males into the early years. So thank you, Conor.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see, Conor, just if you do it into presenter, you know, go to presenting. No, it's okay. If you go slideshow and then presenting, then that's us from the beginning. Perfect.
From the beginning is the best way to start. So I have the red eye shift here, Barbara, the last, and I will
Giving the best to last, Conor.
I didn't want to say it about myself, but no, I'm going to disappoint the crowd and the audience on this one. But no, I'm delighted to be asked to be in this, to be involved this afternoon. And as Pauline alluded to, Kevin, I'm going to give a more local, on the ground perspective of it. So I am Conor Mcardle, the manager of Sure Start in South Armagh. And basically what I'm going to go through is how we looked at the area of male employees across the southern area, but specifically focusing on my own project in South Armagh. Like Kevin, when I started in 2016, I think, and around that time, there was no frontline male staff. There was another problem what we had was fathers, and fathers were not present at routine activities as service users. And so, like any quality improvement exercise, we started off with that problem in 2013. So I instigated and coordinated a review on what was happening or not happening across the shear starts in the southern area to see how we can get to the bottom of this. And the initial audit of the service was approximately 2% of the 7,500 parents registered were fathers or male carers. So it is a correlation between male workers. And when fathers did participate, they were generally involved in the bigger events in Sure Start, like fun days and fun days. So it was an area that we needed to address and turn around. So we needed to dig deeper into the stats that we had. Sorry, I have to go back to them. The thing. We needed to dig deeper into the statistics and see what the problem was. So we asked, we commissioned the support of Centre of Excellence to dig deeper into our stats. And across Southern area at that time, we consulted 600 fathers about their services of Sure Start, and they were broke down into 3 categories. Fathers who were registered but didn't take up services, those who attended service, which was quite low, and those who weren't are not registered but eligible to do so. So once we done that, we had some critical areas that came out of that consultation, and as Dr. Brody said about men in love being with children, that came out very much within the consultation with fathers. I know he was alluding to the workers. So the things that came out of that was logistics and times. Fathers wanted evening work or evening programs and afternoon programs. And they wanted programs to be focused and practical to them. They wanted to know why they were going to it, what was the outcome of it, and how practical it was. And it also a key thing came out that they wanted programs that they could bring their children along. So they didn't really care too much about the father own focused programs. They wanted a father and child experience. And the other key thing was that they felt it easier to enter or engage in programs when there's other males involved. So that led us to think about male workers. So as a key outcome of that consultation process across the Southern area, we've done a strategic plan of how to bring fathers' participation forward. And one of the key areas was getting more male workers on board. Now, we have the 3 male workers, and as Kevin says, we have Keith in the audience, Keith Cullen, who's been one of the stalwarts of getting fathers involved in Sure Start. And there's another Keith in Portadown. Keith isn't a prerequisite to get a job in Sure Start, but there is another Keith. And both of them, if they don't mind me saying, and Kevin did say about they went through Stranmillis to do their early years degree, and that was a complete career change for them. And here in South Armagh, we have our Robert, who is involved in Sure Start, and he's a background in social work. But there was a key thing in the another key thing was the increase of registrations we got from with fathers. We had 2% went up to 35%. due to that strategic plan and review. And then fathers were participating in a broad range of services, which was good. They weren't just coming to the big events anymore, they were coming to all the services as possible. Then the photographs, I have to say, that I'm showing on the right-hand side are of programs that we deliver in South Armagh, who are organised by fathers. I think the crucial factor for the success in South Armagh was the appointment of full-time fathers workers, both to date and male. And over the year, it has increased, without doubt, fathers' participation in service. But also another key area what I found is leadership. And as Pauline said, early years the organisation is the lead body for South Armagh. And they have a clear focus on recruiting males, which is demonstrated in their corporate plan. And as I have a lead body that it demonstrates how leadership is very important if we want to turn this trend around about males working in the earlier sector. So how do males workers contribute to quality improvement? And I think a few things have already been mentioned about challenging stereotypes. But for our perspective, there's meaningful engagement with fathers. We're getting now involved with evidence-based programs like hypnobirthing, incredible years, metal dads, nurturing, and then programs were co-facilitated by male workers. This photograph here on the right is Robert, I mentioned, and there's a few young fathers who are involved in metal dads. I think there's a few shy ones I didn't want to get in the photograph, but there is that. So that has the other thing was mentioned about understanding empathy, showing empathy for fathers who are experiencing early fatherhood. And there is a wealth of research done around men's mental health in this period of their life of early fatherhood. So having been able to empathize or empathy, work with us to have open and shared experience, and also being that role model, which was mentioned before. They do bring another dimension to team dynamics. I don't know about the emotional and stability that was mentioned earlier, but they do bring another dimension to it. And I think it is influencing services planning to consider fathers fully. So having male workers does bring the element where fathers are equally thought about in the planning stages. And I'm sure most men working in the earlier sector are doing that. That's a very difficult thing to do, because it is all well intended. A lot of focus is always placed on the mother. Well, we still have a long way to go. You have still only 2%. That's the crucial number, isn't it? 2%. We can't break that. The males working in sure start in the southern area. So if we take the example that we don't fathers work and do that strategic planning and looking into it, may be able to get it up to the 35%, which was in the uptake of fathers. But so really at this stage, what Kevin alluded to was we really, as a society and as service providers, we really have to start truly valuing males in children's development, and it will create innovation and commitment to turn this trend. We need to be on focus. So I'm going to finish off this. So I think, therefore, when we reach this stage of acknowledging the necessity of having males, we know that necessity is the mother of invention and innovation. So I'm going to leave this one to you, because I'm more of a practical person. I have to see something happen on the ground, irrespective of how small it is. But I was thinking maybe an opportunity for Stranmillis male graduates of their early years or teaching to experience Sure Start, to get out there to that really antenatal to 3-year-old, possibly through paid internship. So there is money there that they're getting, and maybe that'll give them a decision. But it's been a pleasure having you. Thanks very much, Barbara.
Conor, thank you so much for your talk, and I know you were at the end, but some really useful things that you've raised, and delighted to hear that some of our graduates are working with you and doing such a great job. And really appreciate your offer then at the end, with some of the suggestions about what we can do with our graduates. And I suppose just before I open up, or if people are starting maybe thinking about a couple of questions, I just wanted to thank all of our speakers here today, but I was kind of summarising some of the things that I have picked out from what everybody has said that I think we as a collective group need to be doing. And I think you're right, it's about stop thinking and start doing. So I think we do need to start targeting younger boys in schools as a potential career, and looking to see, we've got some suggestions about how to do that, how we can really recruit young people into the sector. I think there was the issue about the need for some statistics in Northern Ireland, that we can really collect that in a much more consistent way about the workforce and where these males are working, and what age range. We want to think about target recruitment into the sector and how we can do that. We want to look at the services. I know yourself and Kevin mentioned, look at the services which that we offer for fathers as well as the workforce, so that we can really think about making males more visible within the early years as in general. I think it's important, and this came up time and time again, that we challenge our prejudice, both our own personal prejudice and also society's prejudice about the role that males play. And David really gave us lots of insightful information there about why we need to, what role males play in the sector. I think what came across was partnership is paramount, and it is so important that we all get together, and that leadership needs to take these things forward, whether it's from a government department level. And Joanne, gave us an insight in how the Republic of Ireland are really moving forward on many of these issues too. So we need policy as well as practice on the ground. That impacts, as we say, not just for males, but the entire sector. And, paying conditions, as many people have talked about, is something that we need to, collectively lobby for. I think those visual images of males has come across a lot, and certainly Stuart talked about that in promotional material, and, the images of males working with young children, and whether that's in television programs and books as well as the promotional material. I suppose something even just thinking that came about at our bias, even in who teaches on these courses, and Stuart certainly highlighted that to us, in the training in the sector, FE, HE, we're maybe quite dominant in our males, although I quickly did a head count and realized at least today there was 4 males and 2 females talking, so we shifted the balance maybe in our presentations today. And I think the last point to make, and I think Alison commented in the comment section, attitudes and perception is really key, and that's something that we all need to challenge, and we all have to look at. So those are just some of my thoughts of what I certainly picked up from the end, but I would like to offer or open the floor now. Conor, can I ask you to just stop sharing your screen there just a wee second? If you can, I could probably do it from here some way, but I'm not.
Oh, no, I'll do it.
You get it?
Sorry, no.
No, it's okay, it's fine. And just open it up to the audience. If anybody would like to unmute their mic and ask a question, please go ahead now. Just if I can see if anybody even has a hand up that I can. There's a question from Heather. Heather's one of our colleagues.
Just to reiterate, thanks to everybody for a fantastic afternoon, really, really interesting. I'm wondering if any of you have anything to add about the role of parents and their perceptions in in how they view their child being taught by a male early year specialist.
David, am I very bad, but directing that question maybe to you? Have you done any work with the parents?
Personally, no. However, my colleague in Turkey, a researcher named Ramazan Sak, has done a couple of studies of parent attitudes. And now, how are you going to apply what Turkish parents think to what parents in Northern Ireland think? I think it's like a world apart. Though he's, in terms of patriarchal societies, you can't get more patriarchal than Turkey. And in fact, the case of Turkey is very interesting because they're up to 6 or 7% males in the early childhood workforce. It's not because of positive parent attitudes, it's for other reasons, which I could explain if anybody's interested. But anyway, in Ramazan's research and his survey of different surveys of parents, he finds that parents actually have they're opposed to men working with their children if their children are not placed in such a kindergarten. However, among parents who have children in a classroom with men, their views are quite positive. And that's something that one might expect, where in such a society where men working with young children is just not on the horizon at all. And yet the government continues to hire men, and men continue to be interested in the profession there because it's a good job. In Turkey, it's a good job. You get a job in kindergarten, you're going to have they can't fire you. You're going to have a lifetime of work in public on the public servant pay scale, and you're going to get a pension and so forth and so on. So that's why it attracts men. But in terms of other kinds of research about attitudes of parents, I know there's research out there, but I really don't have access to it. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, David, for that. I saw Patricia Murray has her hand up, but Patricia would like to ask a question. Maybe you want to direct it to one of the panel.
Maybe possibly yourselves or any of the nurseries that are here. Any ideas or novel ways to get male family members involved in the life of nursery? Maybe volunteer to come in or visit the nursery. Any novel ideas of ways and strategies to do that? Because we're thinking of trying to promote males in our early years. We're an entire female team, so we'll be looking to invite males in. So any suggestions or ideas will be very helpful.
Either maybe Kevin or Conor would have a suggestion there.
Yeah, I think, Patricia, an awful lot of it is it's the out of hours stuff. And I think that's a lot of what Sheer Start's had to evolve over the last 20 years. It's trying to run the stuff during the daytime that a lot of dads and males struggle with. It's the sort of the after hours, the Saturday mornings. There's nearly no getting away from it. But in terms of actual content of when you've run it, we've sort of kind of find it's back to the sales pitch. Women have a sort of different level of emotional intelligence. We always find advertising services, they'll read between the softer, the wriggles and giggles type language of a group name, where we would always say men want the Ronseal version. They want exactly what it says in the tin. So if you're inviting them in for a physical play session, you call it a physical play session. And it's maybe the assumptions that have probably passed now, where you had to do something cliched with dads. They will come to a lot of the services that you would normally run for a mum. Should it be parenting programs, baby massage, all those things, if they're asked, if it's formally addressed to them. But I do think the big stickler is it's the out of hours stuff. It's trying to target men out of the 9 to 5, which puts, and the same with working mums as well, to be fair, to try and make it more accessible for them time wise.
Yeah, I would say probably recommend, Patricia, if you're in a Sure Start area, to contact your local Sure Start, because a lot of your fathers maybe have been involved at some stage with Sure Start and maybe have dropped out due to the children starting preschool. No, I think the thing about is giving a wee bit of ownership to the program. Something that they would. I know in other local areas there may be levels of practical stuff that might be needed around it. But the other thing is what Kevin was saying, and I was saying in my presentation, that the 600 fathers to be consulted wanted practical programs that they've seen an outcome and see. So the likes of getting your local Sure Start speech and language therapist, maybe you do a session about fathers, important to speak with fathers, you might get that, or you get maybe your local health visitors to look at brain development, half an hour, 20 minutes, some of them wee sessions. But I think Patricia, it's getting people through the door. And another interesting thing, and probably shouldn't really be saying at this forum, but one of the things that came out of the consultation is men didn't really care if it was men presenting to it. That was never an issue with the fathers. That they just wanted to know that the person who's giving them that information knew what they're talking about, and that's all across everyone. So there you go. That's my advice on that, Barbara.
Thank you very much. I think Joanne has put a comment in from her research. I think you did speak to parents, Joanne. Maybe you want to just reply there.
Yeah, I looked at parents' responses to male educators, and what I found, similar to what David has suggested, is that those parents who had experience of male educators were quite positive about it. The male educators that I interviewed, most of them could report at least one experience, if not a couple, of a negative experience with parents that really had a knock on their confidence and left them kind of, I suppose, very aware of themselves as a man. But for the most part, their experiences with parents were positive. And the parent responses reflected that. So the vast majority of parents said, ability is more important than gender. I love the idea that my child is, mixing with both men and women. But there were a handful of responses that indicated particular things like intimate care, affection, those kinds of tactile, I suppose, caring behaviors that they had issues with. And one, I suppose, was self-aware enough to say, I hate that I think this, but I'm not comfortable with a man changing my child's nappy. So it's a very small minority from my research, and my parents' sample was quite small, and it's a small minority from where the men are coming from, but it only takes one really negative experience to have quite a significant negative impact on a man's confidence and his awareness of himself as a man in a predominantly female environment.
Thank you for that, Joanne. I've just written down research, another bit on my list of what we need to do following this. So maybe, we do need to look for more research. Pauline, your hand was up earlier. Was there?
I suppose, Barbara, my hand was up at the point, I think, where somebody asked the question about parents. We haven't conducted any research directly with parents. A bit like Joanne said, I did have one member of staff report an incident like that to me. But I suppose what I really wanted to say was not to underestimate the value of the work that's happening with fathers, because that has an enormous potential to really drive a lot of change. These are very young fathers that Conor and Kevin and the team across the Southern area have been working with. I'm out and about in preschools all the time, and I talk to preschool leaders, and they invariably tell me, well, I got involved, I went to parent and toddler group with my children when they were young, then I did some courses in the local FE college, then I got a job in a play group, etc. I think the more we can engage fathers in the way that the Sure Starts are doing, the more we make the presence of men a normality within settings. And I'm very, very hopeful that will lead to more men joining the profession as well. That will be one of the things that will lead to that. So I think Conor and his colleagues are doing absolutely fantastic work.
Thank you, Pauline. Yes, I think I'm conscious of our time, but David has put his hand up, so I'm going to pass back for David for his response before I just do a little summary.
I just wanted to go back to the question about advice about working in a kindergarten nursery school to involve fathers in an activity. And I just wanted to share a presentation I saw with some Palestinian kindergarten teachers who had the same idea. They wanted to generate activities for fathers to be with their children. And what they did was, as other people here suggested, they found the right time. I don't know what that was, but a time when the fathers would be available. They looked to the kind of activities that fathers would have fun doing. And in their society, it would be fun for the fathers to do a barbecue. So that's what they did. And they had the fathers put on a barbecue for the children. It was just for fathers and children. And they involved fathers in planning what kind of games they wanted to play at the barbecue and so forth. So it seems like a key to the success of that program, apparently was very successful, was that they looked to find activities that fathers really enjoy doing with their kids.
David, thank you very much. I have been following down in the chat box with some statements and comments, and really I just want to add to that from many of the speakers, or sorry, many of the attendees, to thank the speakers for their really insightful talks today. We have been left with some, really excellent examples, some great research from Joanne and from David, and some sort of suggestions that have been thrown out to us by Kevin and by Stuart about what we all need to do. And I nearly feel that this was planned and planted, and it hasn't been. But one of our new members of staff who's just started with us had commented at the bottom here, just saying perhaps a Northern Ireland multidisciplinary working group would be a good idea, as there's some great ideas for promotion and recruitment which we could draw and pull together. And I think I'm going to add research to that list as well. And I would hope that the attendees today on this webinar, and also some of our speakers too, would join me in thinking that we could move this forward, and that we will be able to think of ways that we can act on some of this work that we have, and to try and make a difference to some of the points that have been raised here today. So I just want to thank all of the speakers. Thank David, who has joined us from Jerusalem, from Joanne, from the Republic of Ireland, Pauline, who is currently in Copenhagen, Kevin, Conor, and Stuart, who are more local, and Noel for the welcome from Stranmillis, and to all of the attendees today for taking the time out, which I know was a really busy time at the beginning of a semester or term or nursery year, to really thank you for coming along today, and just to thank everybody again for taking the time today. So thank you very much.